The Bloomburrow Precons are here, and we were fortunate enough to play with them in advance, so we've got real gameplay experience to back up our rankings from worst to best.
I'm Mia, and I love cute fuzzy creatures.
I'm BZ. We have two cute fuzzy creatures here, Miso and Amber, and they're silly. And we're the Nitpicking Nerds, sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you want to get cute fuzzy creatures of your own, that's what Bloomburrow is all about. Pre-order, get the cards you need from Card Kingdom, and if you spend $50 or more, you get free shipping.
They even have all of the Bloomburrow product you want and the Precons, so go check them out, use our link, tell them we sent you. We're also sponsored by Dragon Shield, best sleeves in the multiverse.
Good sleeves.
If you use the code
NERDS
at checkout, you can save 5% of your entire order, including the new Spirit Animals brushed art sleeves. There are 3 designs, and they're absolutely perfect for Bloomburrow. You can start purchasing them on August 2nd.
If you're a big fan of cute little critters, and you want to sleeve the decks that you build that have cute little critters in them, I think this is the perfect overlap. So get over there, figure out the cute, perfect design. I'm a big fan of the ladybug with like human incisors. That one is amazing. And where would we be without Moxfield.com, the best place to, we'll hear from them later. You won't guess when. You couldn't guess when. You couldn't possibly do that.
We also have a Patreon if you want your decks audited, if you want to see never before seen gameplay, and our podcast where we have our thoughts every single month about certain sets and just the Magic stuff in general. Go check it out, and it helps keep the lights on.
So this is the Precon review, one of my favorite things. Every time we get a new set, we're going to rank all the Precons from worst to best. We're going to be covering the commander of the Precon, the game plan of the deck overall, the best reprints, the best new cards, budget ads for the deck, non-budget ads for the deck if you've got you want to just shell out some money to upgrade this thing, and also some cuts because every Precon's got a few cards that just need to get out for various reasons. We're going to factor all these into what makes the best or worst Precon. The very important factor though is price. You can buy all 4 of these Precons right now on Card Kingdom for $175. So that's sort of our baseline. You can divide that by 4, but we also have the prices of the individual decks, which are all different.
But we're going to go straight to number 4. This is Peace Offering, $40, and the commander is Miss Bumbleflower. 1 green blue for a 1/5 with Vigilance. That is a big butt. Whenever you cast a spell, target opponent draws a card. Put a 1/1 counter on target creature. It gains flying until end of turn. If this is the second time this ability is resolved this turn, you draw 2 cards. This is a group hug deck, and it actively makes your opponent's decks better, which is why we put it so low on the list.
Yeah, she's going to be wanting you to put +1/+1 counters on a creature. Probably her. This deck has a lot of counters synergies, but it's also got some like general group hug, like it's got the vibe of let's all get some gifts and presents and let's all go through this game together. It's got that is like 50% of it, and then 50% of it is like +1/+1 counters, alternate win cons, and maybe you could get through with Miss Bumbleflower just for like commander damage, just by stacking the counters on her enough. We did have the opportunity to play with all of these Precons very early, so we've got a multitude of games in with the Precons playing against each other, so I can tell you exactly how these decks play. This one introduced a lot of resources. It definitely helped the other decks not run out of gas. I think some of the other decks were a little bit lower on card draw, probably because this one was in the mix. So it feels a little weird to like give out all this stuff when you know that they're going to use it against you. It didn't play the best. It's probably the weakest deck out of the 4, which is why it's the last one here.
I definitely could see the other ones faltering had it not been paired with this in the pod. So we had to put this a little bit lower. However, with reprints, there are $16 worth of reprints in 3 cards. The first one is Tempt with Discovery at $4. I understand why this is in here. I mean, you get a land, they also get a land, and if they take it, you get a land. So it definitely plays into the theme of the deck.
It's definitely on theme, and it was pretty good because no one is scared of you when you play this deck, so everybody just gave me the lands, or gave whoever was playing it the lands, and they were like, okay, great, it's actually a pretty good exchange when you get, 4 lands off of it? Yeah. We also have Lauren of the Third Path, $5.50. Just a great reprint for any white deck or any creature deck. It just really just goes almost everywhere. It's Reclamation Sage, but better.
I think this is a slick add-in just as a reprint because it gives you the little bit of group hug of you and target opponent draw a card, which of course that's what you want to be doing with the group hug synergies, but also it's just so good to be able to slam that down and destroy an artifact or enchantment. It goes in so many white decks that we run, and I just really love it as an inclusion here.
And the best reprint, an offer you can't refuse, $6.50. Just an amazing counterspell. I'm happy they got it in here. Again, it's kind of on theme because you like give out a gift. You give them a resource, but it's also just an amazing spell that you could pretty much put in any blue deck. So $16 for the best 3 reprints. We like to talk about the best 3 because if you wanted to, you could try to flip these in some way or sell them just to pay back some of the precon, but it's a $40 precon. Best reprints, 16. I think that's kind of below average, what we'd expect.
The value isn't 100% there, but you usually are getting it to play the deck, not just to flip it. So we're pretty okay with that. Regarding the best new cards, we are talking about the top 3 per deck. The first one is Octomancer, 3 blue-green for a 3/3, and you can gift an octopus, which means you can, while you cast a spell, you can designate an opponent to get an 8/8 octopus. If you do, they get it before the spell even starts to resolve. At the beginning of each end step, create a token that's a copy of target creature token that entered the battlefield this turn. So I really like this because it fuels itself. If you want to get the 8/8 octopus, because you can't find another way to get a token in, you can gift that to someone else and then target that. However, if you can make tokens on your own, you can just cast this and not really care about giving that gift away.
Yeah, forget the 8/8 if you've already got something great, just start copying it. But then there's the other extra political aspect of, hey, who wants an 8/8? All you got to do is not swing it at me and I'll happily give it to you. Then I have one. And it's already like deterring the person with an 8/8 from attacking you because you have one. They'll just trade off and they won't get any mileage out of it. So this could be a good way to like pressure your opponents while still playing the politic game and not giving away anything that's like going to kill you.
I just love cards that fuel themselves. The next one is Tempt with Bunnies, another one in the Tempt cycle. 2 and a white for a sorcery. Draw a card and create a 1/1 rabbit. Each opponent may do that, and then you do it for each opponent who does. I think bunnies are so cute, and having a little bit of card draw is never bad.
Yeah, so we're going to, in this deck, again, like with Template Discovery, everybody just always took it. This deck wasn't that scary, so usually it was 3 mana, 4 cards, 4 bunnies, and you give away a card and a bunny for each person. That's okay. This deck can't really use the bunnies that well, but I think this card is still good and might see play in plenty of other places.
The next one is a spicy inclusion in here. It's Bloodroot Apothecary, 2 and a green for a 3/3 with Toxic 2. When it enters, you and target opponent create a treasure token. Whenever opponent sacks a non-creature token, they get 2 poison counters. I think this is incredibly an interesting new card to put in here because I would not expect the Group Hug deck to have a poison card.
Yeah, it even has Toxic, so if it just hits you, like with Bumbleflower's Flying Evasion ability, then they start taking poison. This doesn't actually kill people. It just says that you can't sacrifice non-creature tokens. That's still fine, though. We'll still take that. And then if you're playing an Infect deck, which is, of course, where you probably take this card out of the Bumbleflower deck, put it into an Infect deck, and it's like a nice little beater that can poison people with combat, like most Infect creatures should be able to, but also has that extra static of, like, no more treasures. Sorry, if you crack a treasure, you actually will just lose the game.
I'm just thinking about Group Hug decks, and I would never expect to see a poison card in there, so I think this is very weird to see.
Bumbleflower's got some tricks up her sleeve. Don't trust her. She's very, very sketchy. But if you're looking to upgrade Miss Bumbleflower's deck, we got some budget ads for you right here. Edric, Spymaster of Trest. This fits perfectly with the deck. It says, hey, don't attack me, send your resources elsewhere, and I'll reward you for it. Now we're all still drawing cards, but it slightly favors you because your opponents are going to be the only ones taking damage in combat.
Narset, Parter of Veils, is also amazing in this deck because it stops them from drawing those extra cards so you can get the triggers that you need without actually giving resources to other people.
Is this a good card? Yes. Is this a thematic card? Absolutely not, but it makes Bumbleflower really, really good. Now we're going to be drawing cards. We give out 1 card, sure, but then never again. And we can also cast instants on their turn, so after they draw, we give them cards with Bumbleflower and they just get nothing. Kind of mean. You could also combine it with Wheels if you want to power up this deck to the extreme. I think that's a decent way to take it in terms of like actually winning games. Not a good Group Hug thing to do.
It's just so hard to close out with Group Hug, so we do need some win cons or at least ways to win the game without giving our opponents too much. Free Strider Lookout makes you actually take your crimes and make it into ramp, and that you actually commit crimes when you put 1/1 counters on your opponent's stuff. So
yeah, Bumbleflower can do that whenever you cast a spell, so it's really easy to get this every single turn.
Herd Bailoff also helps when you put 1/1 counters on stuff. You make 4/4s. So if you actually need to swing out, which I think you're going to have to do because you need ways to win, this is a great way to build an army quickly.
Yeah, whenever you're casting spells, you just get a 4/4, and then if you untap with all this stuff, and maybe you can protect it with like an offer you can't refuse. Now you've got like a pretty decent army, maybe 16 power, maybe more. And then Bumbleflower can give flying to the Herd Bailoff, which is the biggest creature anyway because it's been accumulating counters. So this could be an actual win con for the deck. The deck definitely could use some because it just has some, it doesn't have like combat win cons. It has like alternate win conditions, and at least in the playtest games that we played, they were very easy to stop.
The scariest part of this deck was Bumbleflower and just being able to keep something up like a spell and then make something bigger, give it flying so you could block the flyer in the air or something like that.
Bumbleflower would be like a 6/10 in most of the time.
Basking Broodscale is also a way to get some extra mana or creatures depending on what you need. You put a 1/1 counter on it and you make a 0/1 spawn. You might even be able to combo depending on what you put in this deck.
Card just combos on accident. If you have Rosy Cotton, that also combos with this. If you have like a Soul Warden and like a Cleric class, that combos with this. This thing goes off with a ham sandwich. So if you want to take this deck in the spikier route, that's a good way to go, but you don't have to. This is still good in the base deck. It's still good in the group hug deck where you're just putting counters, accumulating spawn, and treating it like whenever you cast a spell, get a mana.
But if you want to talk about non-budget ads, let's talk about one that is just a spicy card in general. Smothering Tithe. Have we ever heard of it?
It's pretty good.
It's really good when you're making other people draw a ton of cards and you're getting a bunch of mana advantage off of it because they won't be paying those 2 every time.
Yeah, this makes Bumbleflower feel kind of busted. Now you're getting an actual mana every single time. This is not optional. Whenever you're gifting a card from the various gift cards in this deck, it makes Tempt with Bunnies a whole lot less tempting, and this is just a monster card in this deck.
Fairy Mastermind, also amazing. You can flash this in at instant speed, and when other people draw their second card, which you will make them do, you're also going to be drawing a card, so you can get to those win cons way faster.
And straight up, if you need some group hug fuel, this just pays 4 mana and have everybody draw a card. Also, Generous Patron, this card is another really good card. It almost makes me want to build this deck because I'm seeing group hug stuff, but I'm also seeing like some actual assertiveness with all the counters synergies. So you could go both ways. Generous Patron, whenever you Bumbleflower them, you can put it on their stuff, and now you're drawing a card. But they were supposed to be the one to draw a card, but now you both draw a card instead, and you're powering up their things. This could be like you're forcing them to attack, maybe, with Edric is like incentivizing them to attack. All the creatures are big. You're giving out 8/8s. We might have something going here.
I mean, you love Generous Patron, so I'm not surprised you're very hyped for this.
I also love our Generous Patrons, man.
Nadu Winged Wisdom is a great way to turn those targeted 1/1 counters into a little bit more ramp or card advantage. I mean, this card is completely insane to begin with.
Yeah, it's already silly, but now when we're putting extra counters on, we get extra ramp, hopefully. We kind of want to hit lands off this every time because it's harder to get a bunch of lands in play than it is to draw cards with this deck. So that's going to be exciting. We also have Consecrated Sphinx as our last non-budget ad. I mean, when you can't resist drawing cards at every possible turn, whenever anyone takes a game action, put this card in your deck and you'll have 50 cards in your hand in the next turn cycle.
Plus, you just need a beater. He's like a 6/6. He's flying. He can actually swoop over all of your opponent's heads.
But now we get to move on to the cuts. The first one, Fisher's Talent. I don't really know what happened with this card, but every time it was on the battlefield when we were playing, it did literally nothing. Like, it was really rough. I don't think it goes in this deck. It must go in some other deck. It must be, a treat for someone else, but it is not for Miss Bumbleflower because we kept leveling it up and we're just like, guys, when does something happen? And something never happened off of it.
At best, it was a mana sink, and at worst, it was something that I paid like 9 mana for to do nothing.
Jolly Gerbils draws cards when you gift things. That's not a bad design or a bad card, but this deck doesn't have enough gifting for this card to be good enough. So I think you can either add more gifting cards or cut this card and some of the other gifts because there's only like 4 or 5, maybe 6.
I'm not even sure if gifting is a mechanic that's highly supported right now just because it's only available within this set. I'm not sure if you would actually have enough synergy with the cards that are already released. Realm Cloak Giant. I am sick of this being in precons. We have better board ways. Reprint Vanquish the Horde. Reprint like any other board way. I'd rather see Wrath of God than this.
Yeah, I just don't think it synergizes it like in any way with this deck. So you can cut it for any board wipe you think that might synergize some more. Rites of Flourishing. This one's interesting. I think if you're trying to win the game, even if you are playing a group hug deck, I really think you should cut this card from your deck. This supercharges everyone. And the thing about group hug cards is it's okay to give a lot of extra cards because your opponents aren't going to have the mana to cast them. So if, at a certain point, it doesn't really matter if they have 10 cards in hand or 50 because I'm going to be doing the Bumbleflower thing. I'm going to be giving them too much resources and I'm going to be able to spend it all because I have ramp and I have other things. But when you give them Rites of Flourishing and this other card we cut, Gear Per Orrery, you give them extra land drops and now they're going to be able to accelerate alongside you, cast all the spells you're giving them, and then you're never going to win.
I feel like with Rites of Flourishing and Gear Per Orrery, you're just rushing to second place at best.
Yeah, I think they both lower your win percentage pretty much in every case.
Moxfield. You can't predict the ad when there's no lead up. It's the best place to build a deck online. Go to Moxfield right now. Open it up. You can check the Wizards of the Coast account to see all the precons in their original form and see exactly what we're talking about right now. Moxfield.com.
Moving up the ladder, we have our number 3 precon, Animated Army at $45. The commander is Bellow, Bard of the Brambles. That's a lot of bees. 1 red-green for a 3/3 during your turn. Each non-equipment artifact and non-aura enchantment you control with mana value 4 or greater is a 4/4 elemental creature in addition to its other types and has indestructible, haste, and whenever it hits somebody, you draw a card. There's actually a lot to unpack with this card. It's really, really weird, kind of confusing from a rules perspective. I think just that during your turn adds a little bit of a confusion. So like if you play an enchantment that says whenever a creature you control enters the battlefield, the enchantment enters as a 4/4 and then probably triggers itself. And then it's got haste. But the thing that we notice about Bellow, this game plan, obviously you want to get a lot of artifacts and enchantments that cost a lot of mana in play. They're all 4/4s. They theoretically can now attack players, and you're going to be drawing cards with them. But there's a few problems, I would say.
Honestly, I was so disappointed by how this deck played out. It was just very expensive to get going. All of the enchantments and artifacts were 4 or more, which makes sense because that's what's played into it. But you could chump block them very easily because it only gives haste and indestructible. And overall, they weren't creatures most of the time because it's only creatures during your turn. So most of the time you had a very bare board when everyone else was swinging at you. So it's very hard to get blockers down. And just if Bellow leaves the field, you don't have a board anymore. If someone Chaos Warps him during combat, you do not have creatures anymore. It's so easy to get around those 4/4s.
Yeah, and I'm not complaining that Bellow doesn't have hexproof or something. Bellow is going to be a linchpin. You really need to keep him in play or else you're going to have a bad time. But I think the biggest miss on this card seems to be that the elemental creatures don't have trample. That mattered so much where we were just chump blocking and just throwing anything in front of them. And then they just didn't do anything. Seriously, we played a solid handful of games. How many Bellow connections were there that drew cards? Like 3?
I think there was like 3 over 4 games, and it's very surprising that they didn't give them like, menace or trample or something, considering that 2 of the other decks in these 4 just make 1/1s incredibly easily.
Yeah, the Squirrel deck and Bumbleflower have a bunch of 1/1s lying around.
I was talking about the Offspring one, so I guess all of them do.
Yeah, because you throw temp with bunnies down, and it's like this card could just never do anything. But yeah, we're not complaining that much. Bellow's still like a pretty cool card. I think this deck just was constructed not the greatest to support Bellow. Best reprints though, there are some bangers that also factors into how good of a deck this is. $31 among 3 cards. We have Bootlegger Stash at $7. Solid way to put treasures out. I don't think it's great in this deck because we're not super duper a treasure deck. There's like a treasure sub theme. Tender Shoot Dryad at 11. Amazing reprint. No notes. 10 out of 10.
And Greater Good at $13. Tender Shoot and Greater Good are reprints I've been begging for so long. So I'm so happy to see them, especially in a precon that's worth $45.
And Greater Good just slaps in this deck. All of your cards now are being able to be sacrificed on your turn for like massive advantage. Oh, I did mention Bellow's a little confusing. The other thing that Bellow does is if you have a vehicle or anything, it's a creature. But if you also, let's say you play Mere Battlesphere, I don't think it's in this deck, but if you play it, it's not a 4/7. It's a 4/4 with with the indestructible and haste. It's just kind of weird. I didn't get that on my first read through, so PSA to Bellow players. Let's get to the new cards. We have Alchemist's Talent. This one's awesome. It's part of that treasure sub theme. It's a class for 1 and a red. Level 1 is when it enters, you create 2 tapped treasures. Level 2 is treasures now tapped and sacked for 2 mana. And level 3 is whenever you cast a spell, if mana from a treasure was spent to cast it, this class deals damage to that spell's mana value to each opponent. So if I cast a Blasphemous Act from a single treasure, each opponent takes 9.
I really like this card. There's also a reprint of Reign of Riches in here, or Revel in Riches.
Reign of Riches, I think.
Okay, perfect. Sometimes I get those wrong. And these 2 together were so much fun to play. I'm so happy to see them side by side. There's also Rolling Hamsphere, 7 mana for a 4/4 vehicle with crew 3, and it gets +1/+1 for each hamster you control, which there aren't a lot of, but when it attacks, you create 3 1/1 red hamster tokens. Then it deals X to any target, where X is the number of hamsters you control. So right off the bat, it's just like if you can crew it, you get 3 1/1s, you have a 4/4, and you deal 3 to wherever you want to point it, and then
it becomes a 7/7.
Yeah, and it just snowballs. That's super cool. I do like the design of this.
Yeah, so with Bellow, you don't have to crew it. It's always a 4/4 on your turn. That's pretty convenient, and you're not even losing any power or toughness. I'm pretty sure that was intentional. It just helps beat in your opponents. Thickest in the Thicket. That's what I aspire to be. 3 green for an enchantment. Enters the battlefield. Put X +1/+1 counters on target creature, where X is that creature's power. So it's a nice doubler. And if you have Bellow out, this can target itself to be an 8/8. At the beginning of your end step, draw 2 cards if you control the creature with the greatest power or tied for the greatest power. So if this thing becomes an 8/8 or something else does, you're probably going to win the next couple end step, power checks.
I feel like when I was playing this deck, that was the thing that I was targeting the most when I put this down, because it was just so easy to get that 8/8. But watch out, if someone gets gifted an octopus or something, you might lose one of those.
Yeah, indestructible makes it pretty hard to trade off, but 8/8, very chump blockable, but make sure you can bash in. This deck does have one of the best cards for Bello, Garrick's Uprising. If you have that out, I think you might be just winning the game.
But some budget adds to add in here? Oh, there are at least a few. Gimli's Reckless Might, 3 in a red for enchantment. Creatures you control have haste. Whenever you attack, if creatures you have total power 8 or greater, target attacking creature fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. This is incredibly handy since your stuff will have indestructible.
Yeah, it's kind of just a beefy beater. Comes down as a 4-mana 4/4 if you have creatures that are not elementals that won't have haste automatically. This gives haste, and just having the ability to pick off something whenever you attack is pretty nice.
It absolutely is. Goblin and Archomancer, you want your stuff to cost less because all of your spells cost 4 or more, so this will help with your red and green spells.
There was a lot of ramp in this deck that just did not really line up. We'll get to some of the specifics later in the cuts, but like Cultivate is not really a card that does anything for this deck. It has no synergy with the 4 or greater, and it's not a permanent, and it doesn't really help out. So cut some of that stuff for like Goblin and Narcomancer. Also, another card I thought was cool, Leafkin Avenger. 2 red-green for a 4/3, and taps for a green for each creature with power 4 or greater you control, and you can pay 7 in a red to have it deal damage to its power to target player or planeswalker. A nice mana sink if you have a ton of mana later on. You can kill somebody with it, but I think just play it, play Bello turn 3, this turn 4, then start throwing down your dudes, and it stacks up, and you can build out your board more easily.
I mean, this is just a very juiced mana dork that synergizes very well with your deck. Swiftfoot Boots, I mean, your commander needs protection. You don't want to be in the middle of combat, have someone remove Bello, and then all of your attacks mean nothing. So you gotta give him a little bit of protection.
Yeah, it's a disaster if Bello dies. So protect him at all costs. You're gonna need to. If you've got 4 power plus synergy like the rest some of this deck has, I think you want to throw in Azuri's Predation. We've already got a bunch of payoffs for like whenever something enters, Bello makes it a 4/4, so we get stuff off of it like Garrick's Uprising. This is like juiced up to 11. If you want to throw in this with Gimli's enchantment too, now they all have haste, and you're just wiping your opponent's things off the face of the earth and just winning the game.
Swinging in, that'll be so much damage. But for non-budget ads, one of them is Omen Path Journey. This is an enchantment that exiles up to 5 lands from your deck, and you can put 1 out per turn. Obviously, you don't want to get your best lands, or else they will get blown up if this dies somewhere. But this can turn into a 4/4 you can swing with, and you can just help ramp a little bit.
Yeah. I think people hate it on this card because they're like, well, when I get my lands, it just blows up and then I lose access to them. It's like, but I think you probably just get 5 basics with this. The first turn it comes out, you're probably getting 1 from there. Actually, with Bello, it's almost guaranteed because it'll be indestructible. It curves right into that. So you're going to get a guaranteed land from among them. And now you've already got a 4-mana 4/4 indestructible haste, attack somebody, maybe drew a card, and it put a land out, and it's going to put more out later. Like, that's already your value back.
Guardian Project is amazing in here. It turns into a 4/4, and when uniquely named creatures enter the battlefield, you draw cards, which is going to be all of your stuff. So overall, this is going to help you get the card draw that you need, which we felt this deck sputtered out a little bit with, and it'll help just swing in for damage and maybe even draw you more cards from it hitting.
I mean, Guardian Project, trigger itself, attack you, deal damage, draw a card. That's a pretty sick turn 4, which Bello could easily do. There's also Asceticism. I don't usually like this card, but it gives all your creatures hexproof, and you can pay 1 and a green to regenerate them. This, as a 4/4, kind of gives it that a little bit extra oomph, a little bit extra board presence that I'm missing, plus you desperately need Bello. You just need him. You can't do anything without him. So this is like the catch-all. Well, there's almost nothing Bello dies to now. I mean, he'll still die to, every one of the best wipes in the format, but most of the spell removal can't touch him.
And he will never be the most beefy creature on your side of the board if he's out and you have other enchantments and stuff. So it's not like he's going to die to a Soul Shatter, for instance.
Yeah, okay, this next card's really weird. It's Molten Echoes. You choose a creature type when it enters, and then when the creatures that are non-tokens enter of the type, you get a token copy with haste. Molten Echoes usually isn't a creature, but you're going to choose Elemental, and then when it enters, it'll trigger itself, and it'll give you a second one. So now you have, for the turn, 2 4/4 Molten Echoes. So now if you play any third thing that's 4 or greater, you're going to get 3 of them, and Bello's just going to go off.
I mean, that's a big mana investment, but I love the potential with that. That is just so many copies just waiting to be had.
Yeah, I mean, so you could play Molten Echoes for 4 and then another 4-drop. So it's like you need like 8 mana to do it. But if you can pull that off, I don't even think it's that hard. You just need to do it later in the game.
I mean, you're in Gruul, so it's not too bad. Mana Echoes can also slot in very well here. You add a mana of each type when it enters the battlefield, and I was just thinking about it with Molten Echoes too. Wouldn't that be crazy?
Yeah, you're choosing, well, you're not choosing, but all your creatures are elementals. So whenever you play a new thing that Bellow's going to turn into an elemental, you get a mana for each elemental you already have, and that just chains. So now if you're playing colorless ones, they just chain into each other for free. And there might even be some combos here. I think all you have to add into this is like maybe a Cloudstone Curio and some treasures, and you're basically going infinite.
But if we have to talk about a deck and ads, we also have to talk about cards to cut too. One of them in here was Thran Dynamo. I felt so bad every single time I saw this played or I was playing it, because you think it's going to ramp you, right? But these creatures don't have vigilance. So you're either forced to swing with it, which is like multiple mana, which you'd rather be using to something else to get more cards and get a little bit damage in, or you're using it and you're missing out on a 4/4 attacking because it has haste.
Yeah, this actually, to me, doesn't synergize with Bellow at all, because you're either playing it as a 4-mana 4/4 vanilla with the indestructible and haste, and because it can never tap for mana and attack. That's just not a thing it can do. So it's either a useless piece of junk that just happens to be turned into a 4/4, or it's just Thran Dynamo and it can never attack because it's an artifact. I understand that you get the choice every turn, but I don't think this is the type of card Bellow wants. Bellow wanted the static effect, the enchantments, the vehicles are great. Asika's Chariot was amazing in this deck, but it does not want Thran Dynamo. And the Gilded Lotus is the exact same thing. I just don't think these cards do what the deck wants to do at all.
I didn't like Burnished Heart in here either. It doesn't work with the 4/4 clause. It's not good ramp because you're in Gruul. You can have the best ramp that green can offer, especially with your 4 or greater powered creatures. There's been so many that have come out recently. I don't want to see Burnished Heart in basically anything, honestly.
Yeah, it's just pretty slow, and there's not enough artifact synergies to want it. There's also Teapot Slinger. When you expend 4, it deals 2 to each opponent. I just don't understand why Bellow cares about that. I'm sure there's decks that want to do that, but this feels like a random card from like this might have fallen out of a booster pack. Last is Grumgully the Generous. I don't think this deck really cares too much about +1/+1 counters, and I'm assuming this works right, but like I said, Bellow's really confusing. So rules experts, let us know if you play an enchantment that would be animated by Bellow and you have Grumgully out, it enters with a counter. I'm assuming that's how it works because they wouldn't just put a Nombo in the deck, but it is kind of confusing. So, but either way, I don't think Grumgully is really worth just adding an extra power to your creatures, and yeah, I just don't think you need it.
I think of Grumgully as going really wide, and you're not really going wide with this deck. You're trying to like make a bunch of 4/4s, but you're not really getting the army that I'd really assume with this card.
Yeah, turning 1/1s into 2/2s, that could be good, but turning 4/4s into 5/5s, it's like, what are we doing?
Especially if you're spending 4 or more mana on it. But the next deck is Squirreled Away at $60. I feel like this is the most hyped decks out of all of the 4. The commander is Hazel of the Root Bloom, 2 green black for a 3/5. If you tap her, pay 2 life and tap X untapped tokens you control, add X mana of any combination of colors. Beginning of your end step, you create a token that's a copy of a target token you control. If it's a squirrel, you create 2 tokens of it. I like this card a lot. I usually don't like the squirrel cards. However, I like the fact that this can go squirrels, this can go tokens, this can go a little bit of everything, whether you want to go treasures or just weird tokens like Beezy usually likes to do, or even if you just want to do 1/1 squirrels, it fuels itself in a bunch of different ways.
This particular deck is all about squirrels and like foraging and kind of doing like food. There's like a little bit of a food something, but it all works together. Hazel doesn't care if you have foods or squirrels. She's just going to add a bunch of mana and then power out some big spells. So this deck ended up being pretty strong. Fun fact, when we played our games, this was one of the only 2 decks to win a game, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit more with the next deck. But we got best reprints. So this deck was $60, so it's the most expensive deck. However, it also has the best reprints. We're going to talk about a few extra because there's just so many bangers in here. Maskwood Nexus is $6.50. It's perfect for any Kindred deck. Second Harvest is $10 also. Skullclamp is $10. We have Chatterfang at $12. Amazing squirrel payoff and just a good card in general. Saw in Half, also randomly in here. Kind of perfect with Hazel because if you can like saw in half a squirrel, you can now have 2 tokens, but then Hazel's like, cool, I'll make 2 more at the end step. So that's pretty cool. And then Belladros Witherbloom, $18, great token maker, but all of that totals up 6 cards, $73. This is being filmed before the precons are released, but keep that in mind. That's just good reprints.
I mean, it's a lot of value within 6 cards alone. However, this is also more expensive than the rest of the cards or the decks in general. But for the best new cards, one of them, I love one-sided board wipes, and this one does not disappoint. Swarmyard Massacre, 3 black for a sorcery. You create 2 1/1 squirrels, then each creature that isn't a insect, rat, spider, or squirrel gets -1/-1 until end of turn for each creature you control that's an insect, rat, spider, or squirrel. I love this. It fuels itself, so bare minimum, everything that's not your stuff gets -2/-2. But if you have more, you can just wipe the entire board and keep all of your stuff untouched.
Pretty much an auto include for all of these cards, and I actually screwed up a little bit in my thinking about this card because I assumed it was a squirrel card. But this is also a spider card, it's also a rat card, and it's also an insect card. So if you have any of those Kindred decks, you want this card. I got to get this card for my Ishkanah deck because this card's great. It's literally a spider board wipe. I'm so happy about it. There's also Insatiable Frugivore, 3 and a black for a 2/4 ETB. Make a food token, then you can exile 3 cards from your graveyard to repeat this process, which gives you more foods. And you pay 3 and a black, sack X foods. Creatures you control get +X/+O and gain menace until end of turn. This deck goes pretty wide. It's not super uncommon if left untouched for a hot minute. This deck has 10 or more creatures in play. As soon as you sacrifice like 3 foods, which is not hard in the late game, oops, your creatures are like 4/1s with menace.
I think that's just such a great finisher. It's a great way to use those foods. I feel like sometimes people get stuck with their foods. It's like, okay, I can maybe use these to draw a card if you have like Samwise, or I can gain some life if I'm a little low, but sometimes you're just sitting out with a ton of permanents and you're not really sure what to do with them. So this is a great way to use that and actually convert it to combat damage. Moonstone Neologist is also a great one in here. 3 black for a 4/4 with flying. Whenever a creature an opponent control dies, you create a blood token. Whenever you sack an artifact, you put a 1/1 counter on it and you gain 1 life. Now, I don't really care about the counters put on it, but the life can add up if you're sacrificing like treasures and such, and making blood tokens is just basically free. That doesn't say non-token, that just says an opponent controls.
I think the Eulogist is pretty interesting for a couple different decks. If you've got heavy artifact stuff, or if you've got payoffs for your opponent's creatures dying, it just makes a lot of permanents that you can later do things with if you're like doing KCI things, Card Clan Ironworks. I think just wiping the board and getting a residual like 12 blood tokens doesn't even say non-tokens, so you're just gonna clean up with blood tokens. And as long as you can use them for something, sacrifice them for an alternate way, or if you've got payoffs for discarding like a Bone Miser or something, now it's getting real scary.
I'm just getting ready to put this with like a Bolus' Citadel and being able to sacrifice all those after a board wipe.
That's another way to use them.
I think it's just this provides so much value overall. But let's go to the budget ads. One of them is Draykeeper, 3 black green for a 2/2. When it ETBs, you create 2 1/1 squirrels. If you pay 3 and a black, squirrels get +1/+0 and gain menace until end of turn. I feel like it's sometimes just really hard to swing in with 1/1s, so giving them menace really helps you get in that damage.
But also, when you go like wider and wider with your squirrels, Hazel taps for more and more mana, and this is the perfect mana sink to actually end the game. Sometimes you're tapping for 16 mana and you got nothing to do with it. If you've got nothing better to go, or you've got a big attack you want to get in, the menace and +1/+0 is pretty huge, and I actually forgot this card existed, so like pretty sick ad. There's also Mirkwood Bats, a favorite of everyone on the channel, including our editor Chris. 3 and a black 2/3 flyer. When you create or sacrifice a token, each opponent loses 1 life, making all those squirrels great. Treasures, even better. Sacrificing stuff, Value Town, Beladros Witherbloom's making a token every turn. It's a solid win con. You should definitely put this card in the deck.
I was going to say, you don't even need to touch them with all the 1/1s you're making. If you just have like an Altar of Dementia or some way to sacrifice them, you can just kill people just by being there.
Non-combat.
The next one is Peregrine Took, 2 and a green for a 2/3. If 1 or more tokens would be created, those tokens plus an additional food token are created instead. And sacrifice 3 foods, you draw a card. This is a great way to use those foods into card draw, and also just getting extra foods for your foraging things to begin with.
And this card's kind of busted. If you want to go the power route, there's plenty of combos with this. I know there's, I think it's Experimental Confectioner or something along those lines. There's Nuka-Cola Vending Machine. You got Academy Manufacturer. If you start just mixing all that food nonsense in here, you can easily go infinite with 2 or 3 cards. Also, Marionette Apprentice, 1 in a black, 1/2, fabricate 1. When your artifacts or creatures die, each opponent loses 1 life. So sacrificing tokens, kind of that same exact thing as Mirkwood Bats.
I love having non-combat ways to win, just in case people have a bunch of chump blockers and you can't really get through. Chatter of the Squirrel, I am so surprised to not see this already in the deck. It's such a squirrel-based deck. Single green for a sorcery, create a 1/1 green squirrel, but it has flashback for 1 and a green, so it really helps you build up that board early, so you have targets for Hazel's ability.
Yeah, this is a funny one, because this card's kind of bad. You don't see this card anywhere, but it's so perfect in this deck to build out the squirrels early so that when you play Hazel on turn 4, you're going to have a squirrel to make 2 more copies of. It's a huge difference playing Hazel getting nothing on turn 4 versus having a token and then making 2 more. I love this one. This is like perfect. I love when bad cards are great in certain decks.
You just need to fuel that Hazel thing and just make her tap for more mana. But non-budget ads, Pitiless Plunder is going to be perfect in this deck. 3 and a black for a 1/4. Whenever another creature you control dies, you create a treasure token. You're going to be getting tokens from your tokens. This is just the best way to fuel itself.
Mirkwood Bats and Marionette Apprentice are going to be seeing all of your tokens turn into more tokens, and then your opponent's tokens are going to be dead. Speaking of tokens, Jahira, Friend of the Forest, 2 and a green, 2/3. Tokens now make green mana. Forget the background thing. We're just going to use this. And now not only is Hazel making a buttload of mana, all of our tokens are making the same amount of mana.
If you can pour that into a ton of stuff, you're in business. Old Gnawbone, because whenever creatures deal combat damage, you're going to make that many treasure tokens. We want so many tokens. We'll be flooding the field with tokens.
Yeah, Old Gnawbone plus Mirkwood Bats is GG, I'd say 90% of the time. Also, this card was in the red-green deck, but I think it's even better here. Tender Shoot Dryad, 5 mana, 2/2, makes a sapling every turn, and then it pumps your saplings. That's just a good way to spew out tokens. I think if you buy all 4 precons, I think it's a pretty easy switch to just throw that right in the squirrel deck.
Grim Hireling, this has gotten a little bit expensive, but it's so worth it. 3 and a black for a 3/2. When you deal combat damage to a player, you create 2 treasure tokens, and if you pay black and sacrifice X treasures, target creature gets -X/-X until end of turn. Only at sorcery speed, but I don't think that'll really matter, especially when you're making so many treasures.
Yeah, I don't care about sorcery speed. This thing just makes too many treasures. It just does too much. There's no reason for it to give you 2, but of course we will take advantage of that all time. But you can get 6 treasures a turn with this, and it fuels itself, and you can sack a treasure and sack some other treasures with the ability. It just has a complete bonus. This card is kind of off the chain. Very, very good in this deck.
But moving on to the cuts, Playcrafter I didn't think was great in here. Yeah, you have the fodder to sacrifice, but I'd really rather just have a Soul Shatter or something else. I would rather have this in like a Rakdos sacrifice deck than here.
Garrett Cursed Huntsman, first of all, we kind of forgot to mention that the Planeswalkers in this deck have new treatments, and they're all super, super cool. Like awesome collector pieces, really interesting to see them. We're going to cut Garrett from this deck. It kind of just doesn't help us a ton. Like it makes 2 tokens a turn, but for 6 mana, we can just do that for better.
Maelstrom Pulse is also not a card I want to be seeing. I feel like this was put in because you're playing it against other decks. I feel like this was made against the Offspring one, but destroy target non-land permanent and all other permanents with the same name as it. I don't feel like I want that most of the time in Commander, just because it's a dead card a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's basically a metagame call for when you play all these decks together, so you don't need it once you edit this deck at all or play against any other decks. Decree of Pain, 8 mana, it's a lot. It's kind of expensive, so like I think when you get past the precon level, this card just sort of gets priced out a little bit. It's a lot of mana to pay. Even though the effect is really, really good, I think most of the time we'd rather just wipe the board for 3 or 4 mana.
Plus the 5 mana just will kill all of your stuff with no effect. And yeah, it is instant speed, but I feel like I still would rather play something sorcery speed for less mana than instant speed for a lot more mana and all my stuff dying.
That's true. I feel like you're never going to cycle this card.
I don't think so either. Tear Asunder is also in here, and I think we can just put in better removal. It's just 4 mana to exile a permanent or 2 mana to exile an artifact or enchantment, and just we have like Nature's Claim and stuff. We could just put it in and make it a little bit better.
Yeah, I've always found this card to be fine. It's not awful, but I've never really wanted to add it to a deck that I've had, so I think it makes sense to cut here. But that does bring us to the number 1 precon, kind of by a lot. This deck is pretty awesome. Family Matters at $35. The commander is Zinnia, Valley's Voice, white, red, blue for a 1/3 flyer. It gets +X/+O, where X is the number of creatures you control with base power 1. And creature spells you cast have Offspring 2. So if I cast Solemn Simulacrum, I can pay 6 mana to get a 2/2 Solemn, and I also get a 1/1 token that is a copy of Solemn. I'll get both ETBs because that's just how the ability works. And then Zinnia is going to get bigger because it sees a base power 1 creature, which is the Offspring token. This works with any token that's a 1/1. This deck was just off the charts. It was so good. It was the arch enemy like every single game. It won 3 out of the 4 games that we got to play pretty handily, and it's just Zinnia is very, very strong.
I am very surprised to see that this is the cheapest one out of the 4 because it was so strong when we played against it. We didn't know the prices when we played against it, so I thought this was going to be one of the more expensive ones. But overall, you could win with commander damage because Zinnia gets really big and flies over everyone's heads. The enters the battlefield triggers on your Offspring and normal creatures just really takes over the game and gives you more advantage overall.
Yeah, and if you just look at the cards in this deck just has a lot of good creatures in it that don't even care what deck you're playing. If you don't have Zinnia out, you can just play these cards and they're all do something when they enter. They have a reasonable impact on the game. It's just a strong deck. Let's go to the best reprints. We have Combat Celebrate in here. Pretty good to make an Offspring of. It gives you a lot of combats, and Zinnia will probably just kill somebody with it. It's $6. We also have Luminous Broodmoth. If your tokens, or sorry, your non-token creatures die, they have ETBs most likely, so then they'll come back with flying.
This is a $13 reprint, and I'm super happy to see it in here. It hasn't had a reprint since its first printing, so having it in a precon is amazing value. There's also Helm of the Host, $16. This can combo if you have the right pieces, but overall you put it on your best value creature and get copies of them every single combat.
Yeah, I mean, you put this on anything and you're having a pretty good time, but I never got to do this, but I really wanted to put it on Zinnia, because now the Zinnias are like high-fiving each other and just having like a million power, and now you can clone your creatures 2 times. Yeah, it's pretty silly. I mean, Helm of the Host is a cool card. It's a good reprint too. But let's go over to the best new cards in this deck that are making an appearance, a debut, if you will. Echoing Assault, 4 and a red for an enchantment. Creature tokens you control have menace. Whenever you attack a player, choose target non-token creature that's attacking that player. Create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a 1/1 token that is tapped and attacking that player. Sacrifice it at the end of the next end step. So it's got all the words you'd expect. These cards are so wordy, but you know exactly what they do. It's perfect to give it menace. It's perfect to make another basically offspring of it, and you just get value out of it.
I mean, getting the ETB pumping Zinnia because it's a 1/1, and if you have any death triggers or something, or if you have ETB triggers, getting those for free, I mean, this is a really good card. I like this a lot, especially for the token decks.
Yeah, also Polywog Prodigy, 1 and a blue, 1/3 evolve. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell with mana value less than its power, you draw a card. I think this card is really strong, not necessarily in this deck, but in Commander in general. You get to level this up to like a 3-power thing. Now, whenever someone's throwing out a Signet or a Mana Rock or fast mana or a counterspell, you just get to draw cards. It's not an optional. It's just, this card's good.
I mean, I think this is going to be a higher power card, but this is a spicy one. And the best Perforos imitator that I've ever seen, Agate Instigator. 1 in a red for a 1/3, but as offspring, 1 in a red. Whenever another creature you control enters, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent. So if you offspring it, one of them will see the other one, and you'll already get 1 damage, and that's 4 mana, which isn't a bad rate for 2 bodies that also deal 2 every time a creature enters.
If this card just didn't have offspring, we would be still talking about it because it would still be very good. We have like Witty Roastmaster, those kind of effects still see play. They're good, and this is just better than all of those. This is like one of the best Perforos or Impact Tremors effects that I've ever seen. So I'm super happy to play it. It's going to be all over the place. But let's look at some budget adds to power up this deck. Mentor the Meek is a sweet one because now whenever you offspring, you get to cash it in for a card because it'll always be a 1/1.
I felt like this deck lacked some card draw, so this really helps, especially when you're making those offspring tokens. Impact Tremors, you know it, you love it. We were talking about the impact of it prior on the offspring creature, but it'll deal 1 damage to each opponent when creatures enter, so you're going to be offspring and you're going to be getting even more damage when you're just casting spells left and right.
There's also just token cards in this deck. One of the ways that I won the game where I played this card, I just had Elspeth Sun's Champion. I was just plussing to make 3 tokens. Whenever you do that and make a big burst of tokens, you're going to be damaging people. Also, Moldrifter, classic. You can evoke it for cheaper, then pay the offspring on that to still pay 5 mana, but you get 4 cards out of it. That's pretty sick.
Welcoming Vampire has a great home in here. Whenever a creature's power 2 or less ETB under your control, you draw a card only once a turn, but that doesn't matter because you're going to be getting extra cards, which is what you need.
And sometimes there are weird cast triggers that don't work with Welcoming Vampire, but this time it does work because when you cast it, you will get a 1/1 Welcoming Vampire when this enters. So you'll actually see it, or you'll see the other one and you'll draw a card off of it because the Welcoming Vampires see each other.
I love that interaction. And Austere Command. It's a 6 mana board wipe, but you can choose to destroy things based on what you need. And I feel like if you want to save your big stuff or if you want to save your offspring tokens or something, this is a good way to pick and choose what you want.
Yeah, it depends on what you got. Most of the cards in this deck are probably going to be creatures with low mana values, so that when you offspring them, the offspring, even though it has the same mana value, like 3 or 2 or whatever, it still won't die to that destroy mana value 4 or greater. Plus, Zinnia and all of your like basic tokens are obviously going to survive that, so that can get a lethal swing for you. Plus, someone's playing an artifact deck. Sorry, buddy. But the budget adds don't really do the coolest part of this deck justice, and that is kind of comes in for the non-budget adds. I want to make more offspring tokens. I want to make an offspring token of something cool, then just keep making more of it without having to like bounce the creature and recast it. So Nesting Dovehawk's going to be great. It just populates every single turn for free at the beginning of combat, and it even gets bigger. Plus, when you offspring this, you get 2 of them, but they're both going to trigger. So if you go turn 3, turn 5, whatever, turn 5 Zinnia, then you play this on turn 6. I'm like comboing off in my head right now. You get 2 Nesting Dovehawks that both populate on your turn, which will then give you 4 Nesting Dovehawks the first turn you have with this.
Populate is such a cool mechanic. However, I always feel like the toughest part of Populate is to create the creature token. This already has it stapled onto your commander, so you can play all of those cool Populate effects to begin with. O'Hare Talk, Deepest Foundation. You're going to be making 3 times as many tokens as you were originally going to be making. Nitpicking. So you're going to be getting all those ETBs. You can get all of the effects that you need, the draw cards. You're never going to run out of gas if you put this in your deck.
These are nonsense numbers. I love this already. Like, I think you're going to be building this deck, and I'm going to have to borrow it, honestly. We also have Delny, Streetwise Lookout. Creatures you control with power 2 or less have extra triggers on them, and that's pretty much everything with an Offspring, so it just doubles up. Also, for adding Impact Tremors, the non-budget section is going to have Perforos. It's just a better card, but it is more money, so make that balance for you. But dealing 2 off all of our creatures is pretty good.
And then Clever Concealment, keeping up is something to phase out all of your tokens and stuff, and just being able to use those Offspring tokens immediately, because it's going to be kind of hard to swing with 1/1s. But using them to actually have something to protect your stuff, even better.
Yeah, using them as like mana dorks to convoke this out to save your board is like, would be such a blowout. But for cuts, how about Fortune Teller's Talent? This thing is like 8 mana to level up, and I just feel like it's not the best card advantage.
I mean, you're just playing stuff off the top, and I feel like that's not what this deck really wants to do. I feel like you could profit a little bit better by adding real card draw than paying 8 mana to try and get all of those effects.
But it's also just not a creature. This deck wants all creatures, right? If you can get card advantage, put it on a creature. So just cut this for a creature. Also cut a deal. Card advantage, but it's not a creature. So and then like, why are we giving our opponents cards in this deck? Kind of feels like Bumbleflower lost one of her cards.
Put it in this deck instead. Aetherize. I think this is incredibly conditional, and I don't want to have to wait for my opponents to attack for me to bounce the things. I'd rather bounce them when I want to bounce them, whether that's at sorcery speed or whatever, but I don't want to have to wait for them to swing in.
Yeah, side note about Aetherize, if you're playing these precons against each other, oh my god, this card is... Bellow cannot beat this card. It is a complete blowout every time. It's probably part of the reason this deck was like kind of dominant, just because it just so happens to work really well in that environment. I don't think it's a great card outside that environment, though.
I mean, it was revealed, and you're like, well, I can't get around it. I need to trigger it so it gets out of your hand. There's just no way around it for the most part.
At least not for that Bellow deck, at least. Time Wipe. I think there's just better board wipes. It is nice, though, to be able to save Zinnia and then, rebuild later, but I think you can do other things. And then Plume-Creed Escort. At best, you got like 4 mana, make 2 things hexproof if you got the Offspring, and I think maybe you just want a better ETB.
I think so, too, especially if you don't have a budget for 4 mana, you could be making 2 Fairy Masterminds or something, or 2 Ledger Shredders, and instead you're just making 2 things hexproof. I don't think that's good.
Yeah, but that's the Bloomburrow Precons. They're all super cool. We have Bumbleflower at number 4, Bellow at number 3, Hazel at number 2, and Zinnia way at the top, number 1. Don't underestimate this precon. Definitely, you can go to cardkingdom.com and buy them. And if you want to learn more about Bloomburrow, there's a video right here.